You're lying on a mat in a village in West Africa. It's 2,000 years ago. The sun went down an hour ago. There's no window screen. There's no bed net. There's no bottle of tablets on a shelf. There's just you, the warm dark, and a sound. That thin, high whine near your ear that every human who has ever lived in the tropics knows and hates. A mosquito. And inside that mosquito, invisible, is one of the most efficient killers in the entire history of our species. Malaria has killed more human beings than any war. Some scientists argue it may have killed more people than any other single cause in all of human history. Billions, over the span of our existence. And for most of that history, it hit Africa hardest of all, because the deadliest form of the parasite and the mosquito best at spreading it both thrive there. So here is the question that should genuinely amaze you. If malaria is that deadly, and it has been hammering Africa for tens of thousands of years, how is anyone there still alive? How did ancient Africans with no microscopes, no idea that a parasite even existed, no pills, how did they survive the deadliest disease humanity has ever faced, generation after generation, for thousands of years? The answer is one of the most incredible stories in all of science, and it comes in two parts: what their bodies did and what their minds did. Let's get into it. Let me tell you about the mosquito itself, because even it is more sinister than you think. The one that carries the deadliest malaria is called Anopheles. And here's a detail that should unsettle you. Only the females bite. The male mosquito is harmless, drinking flower nectar. It's the female who needs a blood meal to nourish her eggs. So every case of malaria in human history was, at the biological level, a mother feeding her children with the blood of yours. And this particular mosquito evolved to prefer human blood specifically, and to bite at night indoors when you're asleep and defenseless. It didn't just stumble into us. It specialized in us. It became a human hunting machine, and Africa's climate let it hunt all year round. But first, you need to understand your enemy, because malaria is so much stranger than a bug that makes you sick. Malaria is not caused by the mosquito. The mosquito is just the delivery van. The actual killer is a microscopic parasite, a single-celled creature called Plasmodium. And it runs one of the most sophisticated life cycles in all of biology. When an infected mosquito bites you, it injects these parasites into your blood. They swim straight to your liver and hide there, multiplying in secret for days or weeks. Then they burst out, thousands of them, and invade your red blood cells. Inside each red cell, the parasite eats you from the inside, multiplies again, and bursts the cell open in perfect, synchronized waves. That bursting, all at once, is your fever spiking. The reason malaria fever comes in those horrible regular cycles, every 2 days, every 3 days, is that the parasites inside you are all bursting on the same schedule, like a factory shift clocking out together. And it is smart. It changes the surface of the cells it hides in so your immune system can't get a clean look at it. It's been co-evolving with human beings for as long as there have been human beings. This is not a dumb germ. This is a chess player that has been playing against our species for 100,000 years. So how do you beat a chess player like that with no medicine at all? Part 1. Your body cheats. And this is where the story becomes genuinely one of the most astonishing things evolution has ever done. You have probably heard of sickle cell, usually as a disease, something that causes pain and suffering, common in people of African descent. And here is the riddle that puzzled scientists for years. If sickle cell is so harmful, why is it so common? Natural selection is supposed to weed out harmful traits. A gene that hurts you should get rarer over generations, not more common. So why did huge numbers of West and Central Africans carry it? Why did evolution keep it? In 1949, a scientist named J.B.S. Haldane made a bold guess, and a few years later another scientist, Anthony Allison, working with blood from Uganda and Kenya, proved it. The answer is one of the most elegant trade-offs in all of nature. Here's how it works. The sickle cell gene changes the shape of your red blood cells. If you inherit the gene from both parents, you get sickle cell disease, serious, painful, and historically often fatal. That's the bad news. But if you inherit it from only one parent, just one copy, you don't get the disease. You're basically healthy. And that single copy does something miraculous. It makes your red blood cells a hostile environment for the malaria parasite. When the parasite invades a cell carrying the sickle trait, that cell tends to warp and get destroyed early, taking the parasite down with it. People with one copy of the gene are dramatically more likely to survive malaria. Some studies put that protection above 90%. Now follow the brutal logic of it, because this is evolution at its most ruthless and beautiful. In a place with heavy malaria, if you have 0 copies of the gene, malaria might kill you. If you have 2 copies, sickle cell disease might kill you. But if you have exactly 1 copy, you survive the malaria and you don't have the disease. You are the one most likely to live and have children. So generation after generation, in the places where malaria was worst, the 1-copy carriers survived best, and the gene became common, not in spite of being dangerous, but because its danger was smaller than malaria's. The population struck a bargain, written in blood across thousands of years. We will accept the cost of sickle cell disease in a few, in exchange for protecting the many from malaria. Nobody designed that. Nobody chose it. No one in those villages knew what a gene was. But the mathematics of survival, running silently across hundreds of generations, engineered a genetic shield against the deadliest disease on Earth, and sickle cell trait is still measurably protecting people and still being selected for in Central Africa today. This is not ancient history. This is human evolution happening now that scientists can watch in the data and understand who this disease hunts hardest. Malaria's cruelest weight has always fallen on 2 groups: young children whose bodies haven't yet built up any resistance, and pregnant women whose changed immune systems make them newly vulnerable. In a heavily malarial region, a child might be infected again and again before the age of 5, and the ones who survived those early years earned a hard partial immunity paid for in fevers. This is the brutal engine behind the genetics. The disease pressed hardest on the young, which means it shaped more than almost anything else, which children in Africa lived long enough to grow up and have children of their own. Malaria didn't just kill, it selected. For thousands of years, it was quietly deciding who the ancestors would be. And sickle cell is only the most famous example. Africa is full of these genetic malaria defenses because the pressure was so intense that the human body evolved defense after defense. There is a trait called Duffy-negative, where red blood cells simply lack a doorway that one major type of malaria parasite needs to get inside. Almost the entire population of West and Central Africa is Duffy-negative, which is why that particular species of malaria is nearly absent there. An entire region of humanity that evolved to lock the parasite's key out of the door. There are others, variations in blood cell enzymes, in the structure of hemoglobin. A whole arsenal of inherited shields, each one a scar from the long war, each one proof of how many ancestors that war took to forge it. So that's part 1. Over tens of thousands of years, the bodies of Africans became a fortress, adapted at the genetic level against a parasite they couldn't even see. But evolution is slow, and it is cruel. It protects the population by sacrificing the vulnerable. It doesn't help the specific feverish child on the mat tonight. For that, you need part 2, what the mind did. because ancient Africans were not passive victims waiting for evolution to save them. They fought back with knowledge, sophisticated, hard-won, generational knowledge about the plants around them. Across the continent, healers developed an enormous pharmacy of anti-malarial plant medicines. They didn't know about the parasite, but they knew with tested precision that certain barks and leaves broke a fever, and that certain ones specifically helped the shaking sickness that came with the rains and the mosquitoes. This knowledge was empirical, trial, error, observation, and memory, refined across centuries and passed down through lineages of healers as carefully as any European medical text. A healer knew which plant, which part of it, how much, prepared how. That is a body of medical science, held in human memory instead of in books. And here's the proof that this plant knowledge was real and not superstition, because the modern world eventually came back and confirmed it. The single most important anti-malarial drug of our era, artemisinin, the one that has saved millions of lives, the discovery of which won a Nobel Prize, comes from a plant, sweet wormwood, that had been used against fever in traditional Chinese medicine for over 1,000 years. Modern science didn't invent that cure from nothing. It went back into ancient traditional plant knowledge, took a remedy healers had used for centuries, and isolated the molecule that made it work. The traditional healers were right. They just didn't have the microscope to explain why they were right. And Africa had its own deep traditions of these fever plants, its own healers running the same kind of empirical medicine, its own remedies for the shaking sickness, much of which is only now being seriously studied by modern researchers who have finally realized that centuries of trial and error is not folklore to be dismissed, but a database of pharmacology to be mined. There's even a case to be made that Africans understood the environmental side, too, that they knew, without germ theory, that the sickness came with standing water and the wet season, and that where and how you built your village, where you slept, when you traveled, all mattered. Behavior shaped by generations of watching who got sick and when, not a random people at the mercy of the dark, a people running a vast, distributed multi-generation experiment in survival and winning it well enough to fill a continent. And here's a twist of history that flips the whole colonial story on its head. For centuries, Europeans could not conquer the interior of tropical Africa. And the reason was malaria. They called West Africa the white man's grave, because European soldiers and traders arriving on the coast died in staggering numbers, sometimes half of them within a year, cut down by a disease the local population had spent millennia adapting to survive. Africa's greatest defender, for a long time, was the parasite in its own air. It was only when Europeans got their hands on quinine, a drug from the bark of a South American tree, the cinchona, that they could survive long enough to push inland. Think about that. The colonization of interior Africa had to wait for a medicine. The malaria that had been killing Africans for millennia was, for centuries, also the thing keeping the colonizers out. So let's go back to that mat and that wine in the dark 2,000 years ago. That person on the mat is not helpless, even though they've never heard the word parasite. Their very blood may carry an inherited shield forged by 10,000 years of ancestors who survived this exact night. In their village is a healer, holding centuries of tested plant knowledge for exactly this fever. And around them is a community that has organized its whole way of living, where it sleeps, when it moves, how it treats the sick, around an enemy it cannot see, but has never stopped fighting. They didn't have our tools. They had something that took far longer to build, a body evolved into a fortress, and a mind stocked with hard-won medicine. Between the two, the genetic shield written across thousands of years, and the healer's knowledge carried in living memory. They did the thing that should have been impossible. They stood, generation after generation, in the path of the deadliest disease in human history, and they did not fall. And the war is still going, right now, in our time. Malaria still kills hundreds of thousands of people every year, and the overwhelming majority of them are African children under 5. But the same two forces from our story are fighting back harder than ever. On the knowledge side, bed nets treated with insecticide, rapid tests, artemisinin combination therapies, and, finally, after a century of trying, the first malaria vaccines in history, developed and now rolling out across African countries. And on the body side, the ancient genetic shields are still there, still doing their silent work in the blood of hundreds of millions of people. The oldest defense and the newest are fighting the same enemy at the same time. And for the first time in the whole 100,000-year war, humanity might actually be winning. So how did ancient Africans survive malaria? The same way they survived everything. Their bodies adapted in ways so ingenious that scientists are still writing papers about them. And their minds remembered so precisely that our most advanced medicine keeps going back to check their work. The mosquito is still whining in the dark tonight, story lovers. The war isn't over, but the people it has been hunting the longest are also the people who have survived it the longest. And that is not luck. That is the oldest, hardest-won victory in the human story.